really what it comes down to is that it's about finding the appropriate balance between emotion and rational thinking in any given situation, right? And that situation's probably going to demand a little bit different levels of each, right? And so it's not about eliminating emotion. It's about ensuring that emotion does not dominate our thinking, our behavior, and unduly influence our decisions in ways that harm us or other people. When it comes to secondary emotions like anger, right? Are we able to actually rein that in, or are we going to go pick a fight with a guy because he inadvertently bumped our shoulder while walking down a crowded hallway at the ball game? So it's all over the place how we learn to control this stuff, and it's simple things day to day. Like, are we sitting here at the desk getting frustrated and pulling our hair out? Or are we able to kind of step back? Hey, I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm going to reframe the situation. Here is the practical problem that I now need to solve with some rational thinking, rather than getting overwhelmed by these things emotionally and then feeling flustered and incapable of actually dealing with them productively.
Most of us never learned how to train our brains, which is why most of us needlessly settle, struggle, and worse, suffer. My name is Chris Doris, and I want to make brain training mainstream. This is my series, Tough Talks, Conversations on Mental Toughness. I'm interviewing badasses from all walks of life on what mental toughness means to them and their unique approaches to strengthening their minds. Hey everybody, welcome back to Tough Talks, Conversations on Mental Toughness. I am your host, Chris Doris, and before I get to introducing our guest du jour, take care of our one housekeeping item. And that is, if you are not getting notified every single morning at around 6 a.m. your local time, wherever you are on the planet, of my daily dose nuggets, right? Mental toughness tips in 30 seconds or less. If you're not getting those, let's go ahead and fix that, right? And if you're not getting it, my notifications of blogs, new blogs that go out every single Tuesday. And if you're not getting notifications of these new Tough Talks podcast episodes, we can address all of that very, very simply by going to christopherdoris.com/lists, LISTS, christopherdoris.com/lists. Enter your name, email, click, and you get all the goods. All right. Our guest today just published a book called Tough. The guy is, well, let me just read. His name is Greg Everett. And the full title of the book, Tough, Building True Mental, Physical, and Emotional Toughness for Success and Fulfillment. It's an incredible read. It's unbelievably well organized. And he ends each chapter with a summarization, right, which he calls of focal points. So he bullet lists all the main points, and then follows that up with suggested action steps. So it's like a totally practical piece, right? So Greg Everett has coached the Olympic sport of weightlifting for almost 15 years up to the world championship level. He was a nationally competitive lifter himself and is now an elite competitor in the tactical games. A former first responder, the author of Olympic Weightlifting, A Complete Guide for Athletes and Coaches, and other titles, other books, including this one, of course. And he was the writer, director, producer of American Weightlifting, the documentary. He lives in Central Oregon. He's going to have some goodies for us today, and he's here waiting for us. Greg, where are you at? Let's find him. And here he is, folks, Mr. Greg Everett. What's up, brother?
Not a whole lot. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, my pleasure, man. I've been looking forward to this because, first of all, I just want to say congratulations to you for getting this masterpiece out into the world. Okay.
Thank you.
For those that are listening on the audio podcast version only, I'm holding up a copy of Greg's new masterpiece, his newest masterpiece, it's a book called Tough. And I love the subtitle, Building True Mental, Physical, and Emotional Toughness for Success and Fulfillment. So this really is a masterpiece, man. One of the things I love about it is how perfectly simply it's organized into like 4 elements, which I'm hoping we can go through fact, I'm thinking that would be like the backbone of our conversation. But what I really love about it is at the end of each segment, you break it down. You put a summary. It's not called summary. What do you call it?
Focal points.
Focal points, and then action steps, suggested action. So shit for people to go do, to have this not be theoretical, right? So I love that. So this is really
that
cool.
was really important to me. You know, sitting down and thinking about the book that's one of the things that drives me crazy about books in that genre, is that it's either all nonsensical action stuff that doesn't actually work, or it's just pure philosophy with no suggestions on how to actually implement it in a practical sense.
Amen to that. See, that's what I love. I love that, because now see, right? So that's you're speaking my language here, because the whole reason that this podcast exists in the first damn place is to give people shit to go do, right? Things that I can do, like action steps that I can take, behaviors, habits that I can formulate, right? Integrate into my life that will help me elevate every element of my life, because, as I say in the intro to the every Tough Talks episode, it's like, where were the classes that taught us how to strengthen the way that we use our minds? Well, we didn't have it. So this is one of those. So I was wondering if we could, there's a few things that I'd like, one question and a couple quotes of yours that I'd love for you to elaborate on. And then maybe you could just coach us straight through the 4 elements of toughness, which, by the way, are character, capability, capacity, and commitment. All right. Character, who are you? Capability, what are you able to do? Capacity, what are you able to withstand? And commitment, what are you willing to do? So we'll get to those. But the first thing is, question for you. A lot of my work is about emotional mastery training, helping people become emotional masters, right? What, in your opinion, what's the role that emotion plays in mental toughness?
Well, I think first you got to take it even a step back farther and ask, what's the role that emotion plays in life, period? Because so many of us who are approaching this idea of mental toughness or toughness in general have this misguided notion that we have to eliminate emotion from our lives, from our experience, because it's this thing that it's an obstacle or misleads us. And I try to make the point very clearly in this book that is simply not true. Emotion is, even if we look at emotion in the more kind of colloquial sense of the word, as in like our touchy-feely sort of sensations, that is what provides the texture to our lives. That is truly what we seek as human beings, right? So you can say, well, what's important to you in life? Well, my family. Yeah, but why? Well, why is because it's the way that you feel about your family. It's the way that being with them makes you feel. Oh, no, I like adventures. Well, why? Well, it's the way they make you feel, right? Base jumping off of a cliff, you don't have like an intellectual stimulus from that experience. It is an emotional experience. And so that's first and foremost. And beyond that, I talk about Lawrence Gonzalez's work in his book, Deep Survival, as an example. And he does a great job of explaining emotion is really this entirely necessary, critical function of the human being. And this is the way that we respond to events when we are not able to take the time. We don't have the luxury of thinking our way through things. So this is anything from kind of that knot in your stomach you feel when there is impending danger, but you're not quite sure what it is. It's your split-second reactions when you step out in front of a car without looking. And so really break it down. And not only can you not survive without emotion, there's kind of no point in living without emotion. So we have to understand that when we address emotion in terms of toughness. And so really what it comes down to is that it's about finding the appropriate balance between emotion and rational thinking in any given situation, right? And that situation's probably going to demand a little bit different levels of each, right? And so it's not about eliminating emotion. It's about ensuring that emotion does not dominate our thinking, our behavior, and unduly influence our decisions in ways that harm us or other people. When it comes to secondary emotions like anger, right? Are we able to actually rein that in, or are we going to go pick a fight with a guy because he inadvertently bumped our shoulder while walking down a crowded hallway at the ball game? So it's all over the place how we learn to control this stuff. And it's simple things day to day. Like, are we sitting here at the desk getting frustrated and pulling our hair out? Or are we able to kind of step back? Hey, I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm going to reframe the situation. Here is the practical problem that I now need to solve with some rational thinking, rather than getting overwhelmed by these things emotionally and then feeling flustered and incapable of actually dealing with them productively.
So there's a lot there. A couple things. One is you referenced anger as a secondary emotion, and I'm interested in that, what that means. And then also what I'm hearing you is you're saying that this is a practice. Okay, that first of all, there's no point in living without emotion, and let's be able to have them serve us, or not, at least not interfere, right, with our ability to be amazing. Right. And that takes practice. And what I'm hearing you is, I think what I'm hearing you describe is like a self-inquiry practice. Like you're saying, I'm sitting here at my desk, I'm getting frustrated, some shit's going off, whatever, internet's shitty or whatever. And I'm being frustrated. So it's all predicated upon your ability to even know that. Yeah. Right? Like to even know I'm getting frustrated, to be able to have self-inquiry, to even notice. Because in my experience, a lot of people just live in their emotions.
Right.
And are governed by them.
Yeah. Well, and if that self-awareness, as you say, is really critical, but you do, in order to have that, you have to decide to want it, and you have to, as you say, make it a daily practice and be continually reminding yourself of that, because, like you said, we tend to live in our emotions, and it's pretty well established in the psychology world, as I understand it, that, people by and large make decisions based on emotion, not thought, right? That's why you look at politics or relationships or all these different things. You can give people endless amounts of facts, irrefutable facts, and they have no effect whatsoever on their beliefs or their decisions. And so we experience that on a personal level so much of the time. But as you said, some of us aren't even aware that that's what's happening. And then there's kind of that next tier up where we're aware after the fact, right? After we blow up at our spouse, after we scream at somebody in traffic, we say, God, that's embarrassing. That's stupid. I wish I wouldn't do that. But then we never take that next step, from the kind of retroactive regret and wishing we hadn't done it, to the proactive controlling it in the moment to prevent it ever getting that far, to put us in the position where we have to regret our behavior.
Yeah, that's great. So I don't remember where I got this, but this is a quote. I have two of them. The first one, these really popped for me. I don't know if I read this in the book or if I heard it in one of your other interviews, but you mentioned it's out of context. So I just want you to explain it if you could. It's not even a full sentence. It's a fragment. It says, we replace wishing with knowing.
Yeah.
And hoping with acting.
So this is, I'm fairly mean about it in the book, but the idea of hope is just drives me up the wall.
Good. Great.
Because it's such a lazy, passive, just silly approach to life.
Yeah, man.
And so I quote Francois de la Rochefoucauld in the book, and this whole passage he has about hope and how it transports us to our end, more comfortably, essentially. And it's like, well, this is not good. What you're describing, this is terrible. Like, we're just fooling ourselves into complacency. And it's like this palliative thing where it's like, well, you're dying and everything's horrible, but hey, just hang on to a little bit of hope, and then you can kind of pretend it's not so bad, and then you're dead. I look at that passage and I go, how do people read this and think, wow, yeah, hope is this wonderful thing? So my point is that hope again is this lazy, passive sort of approach. And what I want is confidence in things working out, our trust that they will work out, not because we're sitting there hoping and kind of expecting some benevolent force in the universe to reach down and fix things for us for whatever reason. Like, we don't know why it cares, it's interested in our success, but because that we are taking the action necessary to ensure that these things work out, right? So we are going out of our way to become more intelligent, more capable, more willing to do these things, to ensure that in any conceivable situation, we have the best possible chance of getting through to the other side successfully.
So you're saying that, all right, and I'm going to put this somewhere. This could be even the title of this episode. Hope is lazy. I love that. That's so good. Okay, and what you're implying, though, is that there's an alternative choice that is equally accessible, that's much more powerful.
Absolutely.
And it's knowing. Okay, right?
Yep.
Knowing. This is absolutely a mic drop moment for the audience here. That distinction.
Well, and I think too, it would be fair to clarify that it is equally accessible, but it does require more work. And that's why hope is lazy. It requires no work at all. You can just sit back on the couch and hope for things, wish for things. Whereas to have that confidence in your ability requires you get up, you go, put the work in, you learn these things, you prepare yourself, you do, like you said earlier, you make these things into a practice, into habits, routines. And so that you create yourself, you kind of rebuild yourself into a person who is able to proactively handle these things rather than just sit around and hope they all work out somehow.
Yeah, I love that you use the word create there. You create yourself to be that person. So let me play a little devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't be more in agreement with you, by the way, but for the sake of thoroughness and fun and serving the audience, I want to play a little devil's advocate here. All right, I'm definitely playing. All right, so you're telling me that I'm an Olympic competitive weightlifter, and I'm going to compete. First of all, I'm trying to get into the Olympics. I'm hoping to make. You're telling me I can just know that? It's one of the most difficult things to pull off in life, to become an Olympic athlete, nonetheless an Olympic medalist. And you're telling me that I can just know that I'm going to pull that off?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, beyond that, if you don't know that you're going to pull it off, you're probably not going to. Right. So if you talk to anyone who performs at that level, this is not to say that they don't have their moments of doubt and their moments of questioning their abilities and wondering if it's actually going to work, because that's human. All of us are going to have that, even the highest performers on earth. But overwhelmingly, they have developed the mindset that gives them this very rock solid trust in their ability, in the process that they are pursuing, that those things are going to propel them to the goals that they have set for themselves. You look at just hours and hours and hours of visualization people like this do. It's not this haphazard thing where they sit around daydreaming every Sunday afternoon after they finish folding their laundry. It is an active, a huge part of training, just like going into the gym and lifting weights or getting in the pool and swimming, whatever their sport is. And that is exactly what we're doing with visualization, is we are creating that just impossible to erode belief in that ability and in that certainty that we are going to achieve this. Because without that belief, think of how many opportunities there are for you to stray from that path and to say, well, this isn't going to work, this is too hard, or I'm where I want to be right now, so maybe I should just give up and get a real job, or whatever the case is. Without that belief, it's too easy to quit, because that path is very long and very difficult.
So knowing is an available option. It is a choice, but it takes work, but it is available. It is an option.
Yep.
That is just as available as hoping, which is weaker.
Yes.
With anything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Your relationships, your work, your sport. If you want to be a master knitter, I don't care what you're into. Like, this all applies to some degree at the very least.
All right. So, you beat me to the punch on the other quote, which is, we're positive and optimistic, not because we believe everything will work out, but because we're confident in our ability to make it work out.
Yeah. And this is, I spend some time in there really discussing optimism and my kind of view on it, because there's a couple different ways to look at it. And I refer to Martin Seligman's work a lot, and he had a book called Learned Optimism that came out years ago, which was a really phenomenal book. And he did a lot of early research on this idea of learned helplessness, which is, I mean, anyone who hasn't read that, you should go out and read it right after you finish my book, of course. But it's phenomenal stuff, and it really makes you think about how our experiences in life determine how we respond to future experiences, or how we think about, how we interpret these things, and then how that affects everything about our life. And so this idea of optimism that we typically have is that it's just this kind of vague sense that things will be okay. And Seligman makes a point like, well, we have to have a certain degree of pessimism, otherwise we would just be optimistic to the point of death, essentially, right? We would walk off a cliff and say, well, it should be okay, and fall and splatter, and well, it wasn't okay. So we need that pessimism to kind of keep us reasonable and grounded and in more rational. And my argument is really that optimism is not the problem. It's the source of optimism that determines whether or not it's safe and effective, right? So it's like, I'm optimistic because I've spent my life trying to learn things and develop abilities and practice in difficult situations and put myself in difficult situations so that I know that I have the ability to make it through essentially whatever that will find me, rather than kind of, again, sitting back and hoping and just believing for some unknown reason that things will be okay. That's dangerous optimism. And so it's not optimism in that kind of conventional sense of the term. It's confidence in our abilities, really, is what it comes down to.
So can we go through the 4 elements of toughness? Can you
Sure.
up on that?
Yeah.
So I'll repeat them, right? The 4 are character, which is who are you? Capability, the answer to what are you able to do? Capacity, what are you able to withstand? And commitment, what are you willing to do?
And no, it was not intentional that they were all starting with the letter C.
I was wondering.
Very convenient.
It is very convenient. I call them now the 4 C's. That's what I'm.
There you go.
Right, the 4 C's. Yeah.
So character is critical, and that's actually why I put it first, because it is so important. It's really foundational to everything else here.
Okay.
And so this is the idea of who are we? What is our true identity? And part of that, of course, is what are our values? What is most important to us? What is meaningful to us? What is our sense of purpose? But the really important other part of this is our security in that identity. Because we can kind of say like, well, this is who I am, this is what's important to me, but we can be a little bit on the fence about that at times too. It's like, well, is this really what I want and who I am? And so without that security in who we are, we find ourselves going through life, seeking validation from other people or approval, or trying to prove people wrong, or the silly kind of one-upmanship that so many of us kind of get involved in, especially young men. Where it's this constant competition for attention, recognition, validation, and that really prevents us from truly pursuing what is most meaningful to us. So it's so important that we spend time early on, and then it's an ongoing process, of course, of not just discovering who we are, but determining who we are. Right. And so people say, well, character is not built, it's revealed. And then, of course, you have the opposite argument, and it's both. Right. I mean, there's no point in your life when you don't have an identity. You're not just this amorphous blob waiting for outside influences. I mean, some of us seem to be at times, but that's really not the case. Right. And so through experience and through introspection, we discover who we are at present. And then through further introspection and experience, we decide, well, is this really who I want to be? Is this what I want to do? Is this what's important to me? And we decide those things. And then we ideally create behavior and ways of thinking and speaking that are harmonious with the identity that we want to be.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. So
Okay.
yeah, so basically we start as practicing to be who we want to be so that we can actually become who we want to be. And it's like anything else, right? When you're learning a skill, so you take a kid who's, learning to play the piano at age 6, they have to think their way through things. They're playing scales, all this stuff. Then all of a sudden you have this concert pianist at, age 35, 40, whatever, who these things are so second nature now, of years and years and years of study, that it's that music is kind of like an extension of themselves, right? And so that's the way I look at this stuff, is that initially we have to do all this conscious practice to create this identity. But the whole point is that once it truly becomes our identity, it's relatively smooth sailing. And now all these difficult decisions that we encounter become far less difficult. They're not these far-reaching philosophical quandaries. It's kind of like more of a binary thing. Like, if I do this, does that align with who I am or not? Right. And so, not to say that decisions will never be difficult again, but you will have a sensible framework to make them in ways that actually, align with what you want and continue moving forward toward what's important.
So just so everyone knows, as we mentioned earlier, Greg summarizes each segment. I'm not going to call it chapter, although technically it is, but it's a segment.
It's very long chapters.
They're long ass chapters.
Yeah.
With the focal points. I mean, you break it down. It's organized as hell. And then a list of action. One of the things that really stood out for me in the action section of the character segment is what I consider to be one of the biggest questions anybody could ever spend time on. Right?
Yeah.
Who am I?
The big one.
Yeah, it's a huge one, right? And I love how you take us through like 4 steps of that inquiry, right? So we don't have to get deep into it. It's on page 77, 76, 77. But it's like, yeah, who am I? Starting to just answer the question, like, I'm a son, I'm a dad, I'm a mental coach, I'm an athlete, I'm a golfer, all this just kind of, like you mentioned, it's like looking at the house from the curb.
Yeah.
Thought that was a cool analogy. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the initial answer to who are you is typically very basic and superficial for us, exactly as you just said. And so the analogy is, you look at a house from the curb and you can get a sense of it. You can, the basic construction style, is it Victorian? Is it ranch? Or, whatever. And you can get a sense maybe of, is it taken care of? Is it new? Is it old? Whatever. But that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So what you have to do is really get inside there and, all right, well, how's the foundation built? Is it in good shape? Is this thing sinking? Is it leaking? Are the walls plumb? Is the electrical old knob and tube that's loose in insulation is about to catch this thing on fire? And then more importantly, what's happening inside the house? Who lives there? What are they up to? How do they interact with each other? Is it this chaotic, adversarial sort of thing, or is it this harmonious, wonderful family situation? And so, in a sense, maybe that analogy is helpful. Then anyone else is like saying, well, okay, but what does that have to do with my, my character? And the point is that you have to start with the basics.
Yeah.
And then you can drill down from there. You can't, it's a very difficult question to answer. And it's not going to be a simple thing. It's not a quick, I'm set aside an hour today and then I'm good to go.
Right.
It's going to be ongoing. And so I just tried to provide as much guidance as possible to help people through that process, which really has to be an individual, unique process, I think, for all of us.
It's one of the most profound exercises I've ever done. I've done it multiple times. And one of the things that I keep here on my desk, Steve Hardison, you're going to see this again and again. That's my former coach. It doesn't matter what this says. This is my I ams. This is my answer. This is some of my answers to who am I. These are some newer, some additional ones I got to add to it that come from the work that you're describing, from really, really, really deeply reflecting on who am I and who do I want to be and how do I start being them now?
Yeah.
So that's huge stuff. Awesome. All right, so let's move on to element number 2 of toughness, which is capability. What are you able to do?
And this one is interesting to me in a lot of ways, but primarily because it goes so far beyond what the initial impression from that word is for most people, which is kind of physical ability, right? So it is absolutely inclusive of physical ability. And that is a huge part of toughness and being able to experience life fully, period, is the physical capability to do as many things as possible.
Yeah.
And you'll have some people on the more kind of intellectual side of the scale where well, why does it matter? Look at Stephen Hawking. And it's like, okay, well, don't you think he would have been happier had he been able to go out and experience more things? I know maybe that's a horrible example because it's not like he was lazy or something. He had a horrible illness. But the point is, his life was cut short and limited because ultimately the body is the mind's vehicle. In two basic senses. Number one, our health, our physical health, is what supports our mental, our intellectual, our emotional health. And a simple example of that is if you are not sleeping well and you're not eating well, you cannot think straight. You're extremely emotional, volatile, and you have difficulty interacting with people, thinking clearly, all that sort of stuff. So that's just on a brief scale. But then it's your vehicle also in the sense is that this is what gets you around the world to experience life. And experience is really the fodder for rumination. That is where we get ideas. We can read books, we can, watch things on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, but it is not the same thing. You can read a book about someone else climbing a mountain and you can kind of get some interesting ideas, but it is not the same as you climbing that mountain and experiencing all those, not just intellectual, but these visceral things that you can't get out of someone else's experience, no matter how clearly they communicate it with you. And so, but that aside, physical stuff, this includes all the intellectual stuff too. This includes knowledge, learning and understanding. And so we're basically, I look at it as a toolbox capability. The more tools that we can collect through our experiences and our learning, and the more varied experiences we have using those tools and kind of learning how they work best, where they absolutely don't work, how we can kind of modify their more traditional use to these non-traditional applications because we don't have the more appropriate tool, the more prepared we are for anything we encounter in the future. And I make the analogy in there, this is something I've done many times in my life, and pounding a nail in with the side of a crescent wrench, right? It's the wrong tool for the job in a technical sense, but it works. And, one of the worst things you can do is give up on something because you've convinced yourself you don't have the tools. Because finding ways to go through these experiences and succeed despite not being prepared as well as you would like to be is how you get better prepared for other things. And you learn so much through that. And not to get too far afield, but I talk about Stephen Callahan, who wrote the book Adrift. And so this was a guy who was sailing solo across the Atlantic. His little boat got hit by a whale, sunk so quickly he couldn't even get all his emergency supplies out. He got his life raft out and he survived for, I think, 76 days alone in the Atlantic with a raft that's meant to last for like a week or two. And so the level of creativeness and ingenuity and resourcefulness that he demonstrated, not to mention, of course, the mental and emotional toughness, really is an amazing demonstration of what I'm talking about here. Is that maybe you don't have the tools, but mentally you have the tools to create them or to modify them or to find other uses for them. And the more of those experiences you accumulate throughout life, the better prepared you are for future unpredictable contingencies, but also the more confident you are in your ability to get through these things, right? So we think about, how many things that we choose not to do in life because we are anxious or intimidated or afraid of them because we don't have the experience. And how enriching those things could be and how much we can learn from them and enjoy them if we were just willing to kind of take that chance, and whether it's taking a chance of being embarrassed or just kind of enduring that fear temporarily or whatever is holding us back. So the more of these things that we can do, the more we're willing to say yes to all these other things, the more we're able to experience and enjoy and be able to get all of these things out of life that so many of us miss because of things like fear and anxiety and intimidation, or even just the silliest things of like, I don't want to look funny in front of somebody.
Well, that's huge. That is all right. Slowing that down. That's absolutely huge. Okay. What a powerful question. How much are you missing out on from life simply because of your fear of looking stupid?
Yeah. Oh, it's an enormous amount for most of us.
So everybody take that away. That's one absolute takeaway. Pay attention to what you avoid today and tomorrow and the next day and forever on, for fear of looking stupid. Yep. And do it anyway.
Yes. Do it anyway for so many reasons, but especially because so much of our concern of looking stupid ends up being totally unfounded anyway. Right. So we go through life thinking that everyone is watching us and assessing us and judging us, and get over yourself. You know what I mean? And it's like,
great.
Yes, they're out there. There's nasty people out there, but who cares?
I think it might have been Eleanor Roosevelt, because she busted out with a million amazing phrases.
She had some good ones.
Yeah, a lot of good ones. And one of them was something like, you would be so far less self-conscious if you knew how little other people cared about how you're doing something. Right?
Yeah, it's exactly right.
We're so full of ourselves, we think it's about us. Now, it's like half the time. It's like no one's paying near as much attention as you think they are. That's brilliant. You said something. So there's a cool exercise in this section, capability, which is, you call it the critical incidents thought experiment.
Yeah.
Could you take us through that a little bit?
Sure. And I referenced Einstein's thought experiments in here as laying the foundation, and this is allegedly how he kind of came up with the theory of special relativity. Is he was like in imagining himself chasing a beam of light through space, and that's kind of we started formulating this stuff. But anyway, my point was, we can't create all of these horrible adverse situations for ourselves, right? We can't create a natural disaster that we have to then survive. We can't create, technically we could create a plane crash, but we're not going to, because we're not horrible people. But the point being, we have this amazing mental capacity as human beings to imagine essentially any possibility. And then, rather than just spinning out into paranoia, case scenario, anything like, oh my God, now I'm going to get into a plane crash. We're going to use this as a tool to figure out what we need to prepare for, what we need to work on, so that we can handle these sorts of things. So, okay, I imagine myself in a plane crash. What happens? Where am I? What do I have with me? What am I able to do with those things? Do I have to survive overnight? Do I have to treat injuries? Do I have to create shelter? Do I have to help other people? Whatever these things are. And then from there, we can say, nope, I don't know how to do that. No, I can't do that. Yes, I can do that. And so we can kind of create this running list of skills and knowledge that we want to pursue, and not necessarily master. Like, we don't have to be experts at everything, which is, by definition impossible, of course, right? I'm a specialist at everything. But the point is, we can figure out these things and prioritize based on our lifestyle, our locale, our professions, what we are most likely to encounter, and then kind of work from there. So we start with these most likely things and get as prepared for them as possible. And then we kind of work down the list towards the more ridiculous. Like, okay, we're going on an intercontinental flight over the North Pole, and the plane crashes, and now I have to try to kill a seal and make a jacket out of his skin and live on his fat, or what. We can take this as far as we want, of course. Once we have enough free time, we got to knock out those more likely things first, though.
Well, so you're talking about visualization again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of our most powerful tools, the ability to experience the future in your mind's eye. And we're literally training ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that. It's one of the simplest tools. How hard is it?
It is, but so effective.
Exactly. One of
Yeah.
the simplest and most powerful superhuman powers that we have, visualization. Right. Okay, let's go on to element number 3, capacity. So again, the third of 4 components or elements of toughness, which isn't just mental toughness. Again, to clarify, we're talking about mental, physical, and emotional toughness. Capacity. What are you able to withstand? So the thing that stood out the most for me from this segment is about adversity, and that alone, it isn't really helpful.
Yeah.
It's
This is one of those things where, you know, with social media and kind of the weird environment that it's created, we get carried away with stuff without thinking about it. And so suddenly this idea that, well, just experiencing adversity is magically going to make you tough, or you know, all these things. And absolutely not true. I mean, it's not hard to find examples of people who experience adversity and are completely destroyed by it and never recover, let alone even, you know, learn from it and improve as a result of it. So that's just a nonsensical idea that simply going through something difficult is itself going to create greater toughness or ability or whatever. It is something that we have to choose to do. It is something that it is an active process, and it is a difficult process. And related to that is that even if we look at this and say, okay, I'm going to choose to use this adverse situation, this hardship, this challenge to learn and grow and become better, that doesn't suddenly make it enjoyable or pleasant. It's still adversity, right? If it's pleasant, it's not adversity. And so we can't just say like, well, I'm going to decide that this is good for me, and so now I'm comfortable and just hanging out in this horrible situation and everything's fine. It is more the trust in that process that in the long term you will benefit from this, and you know, on balance, you know, the net effect is that you are going to improve. Doesn't mean you're not going to suffer. You're likely going to suffer. And so the way I look at this is we talk about resilience a lot, and that's again kind of another buzzword that gets, I think, overused and not well understood. But resilience is technically the ability to return to our original condition following some kind of traumatic event or adversity or challenge or whatever, and that's good. It's a good start, in my opinion. It's not enough, though. Right? If I'm gonna go through this horrible thing, I don't want to just go back to where I was before.
I don't want to just recover.
Right, exactly. I want to get better. And it's like you break a bone, that fuses, it gets stronger in that place, right? When we weld 2 pieces of metal together, that weld is actually stronger if it's done properly,
right,
you know, than the original metal, you know, these sorts of things. And so I want that idea like work hardening, where I'm going to, you know, pound myself and drill holes in myself and all these horrible things. But as I'm doing that, I am restructuring, I'm reorganizing, I'm getting stronger, I'm learning, I'm becoming more resourceful, and therefore I am better and better capable of handling something like this in the future, or something totally unrelated. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier with capability, is developing that confidence in our ability to get through these things, because we are choosing to have that sense of responsibility and accountability and proactivity versus just like kind of waiting for things to happen.
Well, you're not even talking about just getting through things. I'm not hearing that at all. I'm hearing you get stuff out of things.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's not like getting through it, it's getting shit out of it. Right. And that's the choice that you referenced. That's the adversity by itself is not going to make us tougher unless we choose to use it. So the usefulness of adversity seems to make the adversity itself less adverse.
In a sense, yeah.
Maybe not pleasant.
No.
Maybe not pleasant, but maybe not even really bad, because you know that this is where I grow.
Yeah, and it of course it depends on the circumstances. I mean,
That's
it's
true.
a large spectrum.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, you look at someone I quote in the book again is Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and this was a psychiatrist, I want to say Austrian, and who was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp. And fortunately, he survived, and he went on and had this wonderful career and created a whole new kind of methodology of psychiatry. And but he had these just unbelievable insights from this experience. And you know, you look at this, and it was, he talks about how in this physically immutable situation, right, these guys aren't going to escape. They are in this concentration camp. That's what's happening. um, but making these choices day to day about how they experienced it. And the example of, you know, he would get this tiny piece of bread every day, and he would choose to break a piece off and give it to somebody. And so it was like he looked around, and there was this just unimaginably horrible situation. And he said, well, instead of letting this completely destroy me, I'm going to do everything in my power, even if that's simply the way I think about things and interpret it,
Mm-hmm.
to use this to my advantage, to learn from it, to gain it. And he calls it this spiritual freedom, right? And so none of us likely are going to experience something that horrible, but knowing that someone like him can have that attitude and be that successful in a situation that bad,
Yeah.
we can get through a couple weeks of unemployment,
Yeah.
or our car breaking down, or you know, these things that we're more likely to experience. And so I think it's really critical to know that we have this incredible power mentally and emotionally to be able to withstand these things if we choose to tap into it.
And practice it
And yeah, and practice it every single day.
with
Absolutely.
all the small shit that really
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
small,
Yeah.
right? All the small stuff. Use it as training content, training opportunities, get in the reps.
Yep.
All right. And that brings us to the fourth of the four elements of toughness, which is commitment. What are you willing to do? You know, there's an interesting comment that you made. Discipline is not a substitute for motivation. It can only stand in for enthusiasm. Can you
Yeah.
articulate upon that?
Yeah, I would love to, because this one drives me nuts too. um, so we have the quote unquote like tough guy persona in our minds. Most of us share a pretty similar idea here when we think of like the Rambo style tough guy. And most of us look at it as kind of a silly caricature, like it's not this real thing that we would respect. But so many of us end up pursuing that sort of thing in a practical sense when we say we're going to get tougher. And part of that is this idea of like of discipline being this self-imposed misery. Like I there's some analogy I use in there, like, you know, the guy sitting on the edge of his tightly made bed in this tiny little bare walled room with just a bare light bulb, and just grinding his teeth and just getting through it, you know. And that's not what discipline should be. And more importantly, we have this idea that, well, things are going to be tough, I'm not motivated anymore, so I just have to have discipline to get through it. And that is nonsense, because without motivation, what's making you be disciplined? Discipline can't exist in the absence of motivation. And so what's happened is that we have popularly conflated enthusiasm and motivation, and they are not the same thing. So we have to understand that motivation is our true underlying reason for doing something. And so the simplest example I can give is going to work, right? Plenty of us have jobs that we do not enjoy, at least
Mm-hmm.
most of the time. Um, and so we'd say, well, I don't want to get up and go to work today. But you do. Why? Is it because you're disciplined? No, it's because you're motivated to be able to pay your bills and support yourself and maybe your family, right? But you're not enthusiastic about it. That's a different thing, right? So when we come across these new things like, oh, I want to climb K2, that initially we are enthusiastic and we are motivated. They kind of run parallel. But you know, eventually that kind of blast of energy is going to dissipate, as it tends to do, and that enthusiasm is going to wax and wane, largely dependent on how we're feeling. Are we tired? Are we emotional? Are we successful at the moment of the steps along the way, or are we struggling? But the motivation is probably still there. Like, there's a reason we'd said, I want to climb K2. And that is tied to our values and our identity. And that's not something that changes quickly and frequently, right? So we have to find ways to tie our day-to-day choices and our sense of discipline to our underlying motivation and our values. Why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? Rather than looking at these individual tasks that are odious and tedious and all these things and saying, well, I just have to do it. It's unsustainable to approach life that way, right? And dieting is the perfect example. Anyone can diet hard for a week or two, but then you fall off the rails, and it's like an airplane into a mountainside, and all of a sudden you're at TGI Fridays having endless appetizers for the 2 weeks straight. But if you understand truly the motivation behind it, why is this so important to me? And maybe it's because you are an athlete and you have some big goal, or maybe it's as simple as you have a family history of heart disease and you really want to be around to play with your grandkids. And so we have to tap into that and constantly come back to that to ground ourselves in order to maintain that discipline in the absence of enthusiasm in the moment, because that's not going to be there for us.
Yeah, I'm hearing the voice of another former coach of mine, Steve Chandler, who taught me that the shelf life of enthusiasm is very brief.
Yep.
Right. And the nature of commitment is that it goes away. So, the Viktor Frankl is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. And you're reminding me of the way that I summarized the entire learning from the book, which is a person with a why can deal with any how.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing from you right now is that there's so much it's critical, right, for us to be as powerful as we want to be, to create the life that we want to create for ourselves, is to stay damn connected to our why. Well, first of all, know what it is.
Yeah.
And then
that's why that character section is first, right?
There you go. That's good.
It all comes back to that.
There you
if
go.
You don't have that foundation, you're spinning your wheels.
This really is a great masterpiece, man. It's obvious. You're so well read and studied, and you organize the hell out of this. There's so many incredible references and other, authors and thought leaders that you reference in it. So once again, it just came out, right? Just came out.
Yeah, February.
Yeah, it's like just a couple months ago. So, so congratulations again to you on that, Greg. And where shall people go to follow and connect with you and to get the book?
The book you can get anywhere. It's in hardcover, it's in all the ebook formats, and it's in pretty much every audiobook platform. So Tough Greg Everett into the old Google machine, and that thing will come up.
Yep.
You can get it from your local store if you want to support local, which is awesome. They'll probably have to order it for you. They likely will not have it in stock because I'm not famous enough, but they can get it for you if you want to support them, which would be great. And as far as following me and what's going on, is becomingtough.com is the website that kind of has all the book information. It has other interviews and excerpts and things like that if you need further persuasion to buy the book. And then on Instagram is @becomingtough, or my main account is @Catalyst Athletics, and that's kind of the portal for absolutely everything I'm doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, brother, for your work, for your time, and for your practical advice and wisdom.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're a perfect fit for the Tough Talks crowd, man. So,
all right, man. Awesome. Thank you.
Just in case you didn't notice, my favorite part of that conversation definitely was him calling hoping lazy. I love that. I couldn't love it more. I talk about this hierarchy of certainty. I actually have a handout called the hierarchy of certainty. So it's like a ladder. The lowest rung is hopelessness. And then up from that is doubting. And then up from that is wondering. And then up from that is hoping. And then the top rung is knowing. oh man, I would have printed that out. That would have been neat to show them that. And I draw a line between knowing and hoping, and then cross out everything below knowing because they're all useless. So I fast is perfect. And that's a great takeaway, right? And this is contrary to what we've been conditioned to believe, is that we can't just choose to know the things that are so important to us, right? Like that I'm going to be successful in my new entrepreneurial venture, or that I will become an Olympic athlete, or whatever it is that we want, that I will have, the partner of my dreams, that I will create, the beach house that I want, or that I will simply be freaking happy, whatever it is that we desire. Knowing is an available option. Visualization, I love that he brought that, he kept bringing that up, the ability to imagine the future in advance. And as a result of doing it, we're maximizing, significantly increasing the probability of creating exactly that. So I love, his book is really just so good. I mean, obviously the dude is wizardly smart. He's not just, he's a badass on multiple levels. So I'm glad that our paths crossed. Get his book, Tough, Building True Mental, Physical, and Emotional Toughness for Success and Fulfillment. All right, you guys, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, create miracles.